Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as we continue with part 2 of our loose impressionist painting with the Caran Neocolor II water-soluble oil pastels. In the first video, we laid down some shapes and blocked in some colors. And in part 2, we're going to continue to do that. As you can see on the screen, I am refining those shapes and I'm adding more colors. And if you didn't catch part 1, I will link that down below and you can take a look at how we got to this, what looks like a hot mess, how we got to this point. And as you can see in the lower left-hand corner, that is where we are headed. That is the actual final piece. That is the piece I'm working on right now. That's what it's going to look like at completion. And I mentioned in part 1 that I was not going to go over all of the colors that I was using. Instead of this being a follow along, here are the colors you used to create it, I wanted it to be more of an explanation of my technique and how I do a loose painting with these Caran Neocolor IIs. The thing about Impressionist paintings is that Impressionists always stayed away from black. I put down some pretty bright colors underneath, and those are the undertone greens that I'm seeing when I look at the reference photo. I want to knock those back a little bit. I want them to be darker. So instead of picking up the black, I am using the umber in these crayons. That really does add a different element to things, and it really makes things darker, and that's what we are going for on this. So the whole process in this video is going to be simply refining those shapes. I want those tree shapes, everything in this photo. And if you haven't checked out Unsplash, that is where I get my reference photos, and I will put that link down below, and I will also put the photographer's name down below so you can look him up and take a look at his work on Unsplash. But the whole thing was sort of out of focus, which I thought lent very well to an Impressionist piece. It was mainly colors and light. There were a few, and you can probably tell in the lower left-hand corner, a few flowers that were in focus, and I thought that is perfect. So that's what I'm working on here. I'm working on creating shapes and creating light and blending all of these together. I will come back in part 3 and 4, and none of the videos in this series are very long. They're all about 15 minutes long, and I will be using some of the Impressionist brush techniques to get those, as I used to tell my students, dots and dashes that create the Impressionist art. So I'm going to be quiet for a little bit and let you watch me paint. I'm going to come back on in a few minutes and talk a little bit more about what I'm doing. As you can see, now that we are adding the water to the umber on top of those greens, it really does knock back the brightness. Now we're not exactly where we need to be as far as the reference photo in the lower left-hand corner. We're almost there, so you know I'm going to have to add some more color. And my theory is always it's better to add it slowly than to add everything at once, because it's easier to add to than it is to take away. Now, I'm not adding a lot of blue to that sky. The sky was peeking through, but it was the time of day where the sun was just really bright, shining in this field of flowers. So you're getting a hint of blue in the reference photo, but mainly it was white. And I really didn't want to leave this area white. I never do that. I always want to add a little bit of color. So I'm adding a little bit of color here, and I'm careful to soften those edges where the blues and the greens meet. And the easiest way to do that is to get just a little bit of water on your brush, and I mentioned it in part 1. Keep that rag handy. I use a microfiber cloth, but you can have a paper towel, you can have some other kind of cloth, and keep that brush where it has some water on it, but not a tremendous amount. Now I'm working down, I'm letting the top area dry, and I'm working down at the bottom and getting some of that grass texture in. And you'll notice my coloring is a little bit different. I am coloring in the direction that grass grows, so from the ground up, and I'm doing long strokes. What that's going to do for me when I come back and blend those colors, I'm going to add a bunch of colors in, and when I come back and blend them, it's going to give that up and down, that vertical motion that we need for that grass. So the trees need to have a little bit of movement, but it's not the up and down movement. That's when my brush is going circular. That helps to activate the colors, and it really helps to get those pigments where they blend together, but I don't want an up and down, back and forth movement. So you're going to see different brush strokes on here, and that is so I can mimic what those things are doing, whether it's grass or flowers or leaves, what those things are doing in the reference photo. you are about to see me do something that many artists will tell you, oh, never do this. Always use the white of your paper. I do not believe in just using the white of my paper. I do that sometimes, but if I need to lighten the color, I will pick up white, and that's what I have done here. The flowers that you're seeing, because of the light in the background, the ones that are blurred out had a very light lilac color to them. Didn't have that particular color in my set, so I used the purples for the base, and then I came back with the light on top. So I'm kind of changing around the rules here. When we were with the trees, we were putting the lighter, brighter colors on bottom and then putting the darker color on top. And now that I've come down to the flowers, I've put the darker color on bottom and I'm putting the lighter color on top. A lot of people will say, this is the way you do this type of technique, or this is the way you do this type of technique for this particular medium. But I have found that the rules are made to be broken. Sometimes you need to switch it around. Sometimes you put the dark colors on bottom and sometimes you put the light colors on bottom. Kind of depends on what you're doing. So you will see me pick up the white quite a bit during this. I need to lighten some things and I don't have those exact colors over in my palette. So I'm just having to make them as I go. Using my flat brush here, working in a circular motion, and I'm coming back, getting some water and softening all of these edges where the colors are juxtapositioned. Kind of want to blend them together. When we were doing our first layer, the video right before this, it didn't really matter if we had some hard edges. It's always good to kind of soften them like I'm doing here to make it easier to do following layers. But now that we are coming to the end, and you'll see in the upper right hand corner, this is where we started in this video. So you can see how things are kind of pulling together, but softening those edges makes it a little bit easier as we add those final layers. So thank you again for joining me. I do hope you'll join for part 3 and 4. Part 3 will be out tomorrow. As always, I am so happy that you're here, and if you have any comments or questions, please put those down below, and I will see you in the next one.